We there we go. We're recording now. We are a nonprofit. We started back in 2007, and we're the umbrella for the Kentucky Goat Producers Association and the Kentucky Sheep and Wool Producers Association. So I help them coordinate education events and funding events and all those good things. And I will mention some of those things at the end, just shameless plug, right, for what we do. So let me get my presentation up here going. And y'all have to let me know if I don't get this bad boy going. Sometimes my Wi-Fi is finicky. So you have to tell me if you can't see it, April.
I can see it currently. I think it's not in presentation mode yet.
It's not. There it goes.
Yep.
It just takes a bit.
Got it.
All right. Okay, so I get to talk about facilities and fencing, and I'll give you a little, some little stories as we go along to let you know, like, facilities and fencing are kind of dear to my heart because there are times where I wish we had better facilities on our farm. But anyway, I'm from Winchester, still live in Winchester. We have a cattle and a sheep farm. We've had sheep since I was 9, so that's about 30 some odd years ago. And we've always had cattle. So that our facilities and our fencing have changed over the time, but can always be improved. So hopefully someday we'll be able to take my advice that I do here on this presentation. But there's my email, my phone number. Feel free to ever reach out to me, and I'll have it at the end of the presentation again too. So the first thing I want us to think about is we have to look at our operations kind of from a 20,000 foot view to really figure out what we need our facilities and our fencing to do for us in our operations. So when I say that, Kentucky's got three kind of key three kind of kidding and lambing periods. Most of us are going to land somewhere in the winter, the spring, or the fall. And each one of those have kind of different requirements that they need in order for us to be successful at our smarter friends, as April puts it. So I'm just going to kind of break these down real quick, kind of let you know like what the expectations are when you have these seasons. And then that's going to lead us into the examples on the facilities and the fencing that I'm going to offer that you think might best fit your operation. So when we talk about winter kidding and lambing, we're talking about December through February, okay? Cold, right? So the last 2 years, 1 year in December and 1 year in this month in January, it was just really stinking cold. And I unfortunately did get calls from people who lost animals during that period of time, wanting to know if there's some kind of a government program to compensate for those losses. But it happens because, granted, we're not used to having, below zero temperatures for extended periods of time. But anytime you're going to lamb in December and February, you need to be thinking about providing some kind of indoor shelter. Now, most of the time, people that are due the December through February kidding and lambing, these are people that are going to have some intensive management because you're pretty much providing all the inputs with them, right? There's nothing to graze for the most part. You're going to be supplementing with grain, that kind of thing. So you're going to have more inputs with labor, but hopefully you're going to have some higher returns. And when I say that, I'm talking about marketing opportunities like seed stock or show animals or dairy animals, or you're trying to get lambs or kids to 60 to 80 pounds pretty quick in order to hit that spring price hike that's going on. Okay, so you're going to put more inputs in to hopefully get a higher return on those animals. Again, you are going to have to give stored forages, and you're going to supplement with some grain. You're going to require some tighter facilities to manage the weather swings. Okay, so we're not talking about a carport. We're talking about something that's got some sides on it, and it doesn't have to be completely wind blocking because you want some airflow. But when you're a lamb or a kid and you're coming out of a 100-degree environment, pop down on the ground, and you got a cold wind rushing over you, it's really easy to get cold pretty fast and not really thrive in that kind of scenario. So creek feeding is generally optimum for your market weights in these kind of scenarios and these kind of higher input markets. And then you're going to have moderate intensive or management with those offspring pretty much all the way up to the time that you're going to wean them. If you're selling seed stock, you might keep your females on grain a little bit longer after weaning, so that way they get to that 80% of their grown weight and you can sell them sooner in the year for breeding stock. We're going to talk about spring. We think lots of green grass, some of us think rain. This is a little bit more moderate intensive. Okay, so we're talking March to May. I remember the past several Aprils in a row here in Winchester, we had snow in April. It was cold. So you're still going to need some moderate facilities in order to make this work. So again, something that you can bring them inside if they have problems, or if it's going to be super cold, or there is a snowstorm or something coming through, you can bring those animals in so they don't have to lamb or kid outside. Moderate levels of input, because as you're going through March to May, hopefully you're going to get some grass and you're going to be able to take advantage of your pastures and not have to have as much stored forage, but you still may have to supplement with some grain. It really depends on whether you're meeting those nutrient requirements on those animals or not. If you have lambs or kids in May, late April, that's generally when the prices start to drop. Most of these ethnic holidays are happening from January to about mid to end of April. You may want to keep those lambs and kids over the summer, maintain them, crank some feed to them for about 45 to 60 days in the fall, and try to sell them in like November or December, or maybe even hold them over to January. So you might just have to keep that in mind, but you're going to have to manage those parasites really tight if you do that. Again, most of the time, these are going to be pasture-based systems. Confinement systems will require storage forages and supplemental grain. I'm not going to talk a whole lot about confinement systems today. We do have a webinar on our website that members can get to about those confinement programs, but we are semi-confinement, so we lamb like in March, beginning of April, kind of the end of February, and the ewes and the lambs are outside until they wean, and then we don't ever put those lambs back out on grass until we get them into weaning, because we have Suffolks and they're big and they don't look like anything until they're about 100 pounds. They're just all leg. Okay, so for us to get a good grade, we're going to try to sell them like 110 pounds. So we're keeping them over the summer. I don't put them out on grass. Confinement feed them all the way, and I don't have to worry about that. We do creep feed, again, because we're trying to hit a higher market weight. If you're lambing or kidding in March and you're thinking, man, I got to get these things out by the end of May, then you're going to want to creep feed, right? And do that. Their females can be on low intensity levels after they wean. You just kick those girls out of that back 40, and they'll be totally fine, waiting ready for you to do the breeding season again. Again, the facilities need to be fairly moderate. Fall lambing and kidding, this is happening between September and November. A lot of people are doing this because, one, they're either direct marketing and they need lamb more times in the year, or the fall is pretty sweet because you're going to have a prime sized lamb or a kid to sell as soon as those spring prices start hiking up in January. This is a very effective way for commercial meat producers and direct marketers to operate. But just a caveat, not all breeds will breed out of season. So, you do a little bit of research on that if you're thinking about doing that. You're going to require some pasture. You may still have to have some stored forages. Again, it just depends on the weather. Okay, it also depends on whether you stockpile forage to get you into that November time period. You may have to supplement with some additional grain. Like I got this picture here. These girls have got some fairly good grass. Okay, but those leaves are falling, and so we know that things are going to be changing there. But you can have some moderate facilities. You don't necessarily have to lamb or kid inside. You just need someplace, again, if somebody has a problem, you can bring them in and take care of that. So let's just get on with this shelter thing. Lots and lots of people are doing some hoop barns, and they work great. They cost less up front, and they're pretty versatile on the inside, right? So because you don't have poles and stuff on the inside, they're coming down like posts at the ground. So you can do lots of different configurations inside of these hoop barns. So you can, some people will set it up for their lambing and kidding. They take those pins down, they turn them into bigger pins, as they're feeding and they're letting animals in and out to graze, and they just kind of change that interior setup to meet wherever those lambs and kids are in that production cycle. They have really good airflow. Again, you're going to want to have those doors, on both ends, kind of in your prevailing wind. Our hoop barn has what I call pony walls. So it's got wooden walls down the side, and then the tarp goes over the top. We can actually ventilate on those pony walls if we need to. but over time, it will require a tarp replacement. So just go ahead and factor that into your cost. Because again, like I said, it's less upfront, but you will have to do that in the end. So you just kind of make up your mind if that works for you or not. Tobacco barns, super common around here. So we also use a tobacco barn. It's a pretty good setup because the way these tobacco barns are set up, they have different bents. So every bent is a different pin, or we just open up all the pins and make a great big, alleyway or runway. But again, they're pretty common. They're easy to renovate. I mean, we took our stripping ramp and turned that into like lambing pins. And so that's where we put them in. It is pretty airtight. For 2 or 3 days, we're jugging them and then we're kicking them back out. And they do last a long time as long as you take care of them. But you are going to have to probably replace a roof at some point, and you may need to paint that in order to make it last a little longer too. Some people have like these little run-in sheds. You can also have some like little temporary shade shelters. As I show this down here, it's got some skids on it. And you can move that from pasture to pasture. I highly recommend these shade things on skids because if you're really trying to rotationally graze and use rotational grazing as a forage management system, not just a parasite management system, then you can move these shade buildings around in order to make these animals utilize the forage in your particular fields better. Because where do they go? I mean, anyway, our sheep, they're going to go to the shade and they're going to go to the water tank, and that's what they want to hang out. So I can make them move around and utilize that grass better by using this. But I will say these types of shelters are not the most ideal if you're going to be lambing and kidding in the winter, or again, like I said, sometimes early spring can get a little hairy. So I would not recommend these as your sole entire facility option if you have that winter or that spring kind of scenario. So let's talk about space requirements. So you do a hoop barn, tobacco barn, whatever. You're going to want to have about 10 to 12 square feet per female, and then 12 to 18 square feet per pair. Okay, and that's going to be an offspring and a female, or 2 offspring and a female, because they just require that amount of space. You think that's kind of crazy? Like, yeah, but I only use like a 5 foot by 5 foot, lambing jug and that kind of stuff, but they don't really get to move around much in that space. So in order to keep your floors, your bedding and that kind of stuff lasting longer, the more space that they can spread out, the better you're going to have that. You're not going to have to clean your barn out as much. As far as a creep area is concerned, you're looking at about 2 square feet per lamb or kid in that area. And then as they get bigger, you're going to need about 6 to 9 square feet per lamb or kid. That's kind of the other reason that we, on our farm, we confinement feed and just leave the lambs inside and kick the moms out. And we have much more space for those babies, much more air ventilation, and don't have to bed as often. And everybody gets plenty of trough space when I do that. So we're going to talk about feeding. You need about 16 to 20 inches per female, and then 9 to 12 inches per lamb or kid. Now, if you're creep eating and the feed is out all the time, then you only need about 3 to 4 inches per lamb or kid, because they're going to eat as they want to. So not everybody's going to be around the feed trough at the same time. So some people always say to me, like, that really seems like that's a lot of inches for this one little face, on this animal. But you have to think about, there's times where the rest of that animal can be a little big, especially when they're pregnant, when they're carrying twins or triplets. They gotta have enough room to get in there. The other part about that is that by providing that many inches, then you're kind of assuring yourself that one animal is getting the amount of feed that they need at the time. Because again, you're trying to meet those nutrient requirements. So you don't want to skimp them too much. You don't want to have too much feed trough that they jump in it and they mess it up and that kind of stuff. But you want to make sure that they have enough so they can get what they're supposed to have. So let's talk about feed storage. A lot of people will feed bag feed, and that's fine. Okay. But if you have bag feed, you know that those bags get torn. Okay. Some rodent is going to come get into it. Somebody's going to step on it and tear it up. It's really better if you can store your feed in something where it's kind of tight. Okay. That you don't want rodents to get into it, because rats and raccoons and birds, they can cause you health problems if they can get into your feed. So I just found this picture of the DIY I guess it's supposed to be like a horse feeder, but I thought it looked pretty slick. You can make something like this. I'm going to cost you a whole lot. You can put your feed in there. But I will tell you, if you can get to a point where you can have stored feed in bins, like bulk feed, you're actually going to save yourself a lot of money over time. So I put these green bins over here. These are kind of big, like you don't have to get them that big, but most feed mills are going to want to deliver about 3 tons at a time when they come. So if you can get yourself a bin that's that big, I would highly recommend it. Because like I said, over time, you're going to save money. This is going to be more efficient for you if you can do some bulk feed that way. Water. Yep. Right. Well, that's a no-brainer, right? They got to have water. So first and foremost, sheep and goats can be a little bit picky on their water. Okay. So, but we're going to want to give them clean water anyway. So if they're picky, it just makes me clean my water tank out more often, right? Because it gets algae on it and it's a pain, but that's what we're going to have to do. Okay. We have automatic waters in our barn, and we haven't always had that. I can tell you, man, the year that we did that, things got really nice because I could stop carrying water in 5-gallon buckets and dropping it in tanks, and the hose didn't freeze and all that loveliness. So if you could put some automatic waters in, but we also still have the water tanks, and we do that too, and that just happens to be what works. You need to have enough perimeter space around your water tanks, especially if like you're rotational grazing and your girls are out in the field for a big chunk of the day, and you bring them into the barn at night and they're hitting that water tank on the way in. You're going to want to make sure you got enough perimeter space that they can all get around that, because they're all going to hit it real hard, at one time. So the other waters, like if you get like the sheep and goat waters, they have like these small pans, but the hope is that they're not all going to be staying around it at one time. Get that kind of free choice. The water should not be more than 2 feet deep if you have adults, and not more than 12 inches deep if you got lambs or kids, because we do have lambs get in the water tank. I don't know why, but they do. And most of them can get themselves back out, but sometimes they just can't, right? Especially if you've got ewes and lambs all coming up to a water tank at one time and they're all trying to get into it and drink, send them out. Okay, so it doesn't need to be super deep. Honestly, really, sheep and goats don't drink a whole lot of water on a per day basis, so you don't really have to keep it super full all the time. All right, let's talk working facilities. So this is my soapbox. Okay, I will tell you, if you have good working facilities, you will stay in the business way longer. Okay, and I know that's not great, and I just said we've been in the business for 30 some odd years, but we have a working sheep, and this sheep is in the sheep. Okay, we have a working sheep that holds 1.5 sheep. So I tell my dad, this is not really a working facility, but guess who always gets to hold the half of the sheep that doesn't fit the sheep? I do, and it gets really old. Okay, so I always tell people, if you can put yourself in a nice working facility, you'll stay in the business much longer. And it's probably likely that when you go home for dinner, you actually might still talk to each other as you're eating. Because there's been times that like Dad and I just did not talk to each other, which is so bad by the time it was over. But ultimately, on your working facilities, you want to be able to crowd your animals and not run them. Okay, let's say that you need to catch 1 or 2 in a group. Don't run them around and try to catch them. Okay, crowd them up in a corner with a gate and catch them that way. Okay, because it's just the more that you can handle your animals with less stress, the better off you and those animals are going to be. Okay, you need to have a facility that you can store your necessary equipment, and you know where it is, and it's in that spot all the time, and the rodents can't get into it, and your sheep and your goats can't get into it if for whatever reason they get into your feed room, because you're going to have your feed in like a bin, they can't get into anyway, but you definitely don't want them walking through your stuff. You need to be able to sort your animals. You're going to sort them at all different periods of the production stages. Okay, before you breed them, during you breed them, after you breed them, when they lamb or kid, when they're weaning, you need to be able to sort these things out. And you also need to have in mind where you're going to quarantine animals as you need to. Anytime you bring new animals in, you need to quarantine them for a while. Anytime you think you've got one that's sick, quarantine it. Okay, get it into a spot where it's not going to be around anybody else. And it's actually going to be kind of the last animals that you deal with as you go through your feeding and care system for the day. So don't put it right up there front center where you have to walk past them or through them to get to your feed and do your things. Put them over to the side. So that way you're not spreading whatever kind of disease or issue or potential disease that can be coming from those new animals. So let's talk pipe dream. Okay. I was gonna get Dad to renovate this barn with this working facility. This is what I would have. Okay. So I'm gonna want some pins. You can see over here on this left-hand side. They've got pins there, they've got gates that they can sort. This place is kind of cool because they can actually move these gates and create additional pins as they go down this alleyway. Again, this is a pipe dream. I would not be able to put this in our barn, but that's really nice. But let me tell you, the thing that I really want more than anything is the sweep tub with this chute. Okay, I'm tired of being the sweep on the end of that chute, holding that sheep's butt. Okay, I want to sweep too. Okay, and then we do have a turntable, kind of similar to the one that's in this picture. It does come in super handy. I'll be honest with you, I use the head gate of it way more often than the rest of it because I'm either tagging or checking a tag number or we're going to drench somebody or something. It's super great to have that head chute on there. And then Schwartz has sent me a picture over here. You can see the orange on the right. This is a multi-gate sorting. So I was talking about you need to be able to sort your animals. So they have a chute, and then this gate opens different ways. So that way they can kick animals in different directions. That's pretty sweet too. Okay. So again, just talking pipe dream. You just got to make work what you can do. But if you won the lottery or you inherited $1 million and you can put a working facility like this, I say go for it. The other thing you want to think about is if it could be undercover, that's even better, right? Because you can work them regardless of what the weather is outside. You don't have to do it in the rain. And make sure that when you have a chute that you can line up more than 1.5 animals at a time. So you just need to think, if you had this whole setup, you could work your animals by yourself. That's the other benefit of this. So it doesn't require somebody holding the back end of an animal while somebody else is doing the head gate and that kind of stuff. You can work them on your own. And a lot of us need to be in that kind of position, right? Because we're all working full time and we're doing this on the side. We only have so much time. If you do it by yourself, it's a good deal. Let's see. Yep, that's what I want to say on that one. All right, so let's get to some fencing. Okay, so your main point of your fencing is keeping animals in and predators out. And it can also increase the performance of your forages and mitigate your parasites. Okay, so we're going to talk about 2 main different types of fencing because each type is going to address each one of these points. So let's talk about keeping the animals in and the predators out. Most of the time we're talking about this on our perimeter fences. Your perimeter fences need to be really strong. They need to be low maintenance and they need to last a long time because it's expensive to fence and it's not getting any cheaper. Okay, I don't expect it to get any cheaper. So whatever you put up, you're going to want to put up something that's going to last for a long time. So some examples of this could be woven wire. That's pretty typical around here. High tensile. You can do fixed knot high tensile, or you can do barbed wire. Now, I don't usually recommend barbed wire as being your only perimeter defense. 1, it can hurt the animals. 2, you have to have a whole lot of strands of it to really make that effective. So we just use barbed wire around the top. But again, we have cattle, right? So that's just to deter them from jumping over. But I would not use barbed wire as the entire fence. Some people use barbed wire with their own wire even on the bottom, like around the bottoms of the post, is also like another predator kind of deterrent, which is totally fine. Okay, so some of the options, like I said, were the high tensile and the fixed knot high tensile. We just finished up a grazing school, and part of that school, we covered a lot of information on fencing. And we had Dr. Morgan Hayes from UK. She did 2-3 presentations, and she spent a lot of time comparing different types of fences, looking at the cost, the economics of it, and then she also uses it on her farm. And so she has a really good suggestions and information about this that we want to add in there. But I will tell you, When she did the cost comparison, the high tensile and the fixed knot high tensile is what she actually recommended in compared to like woven wire fence and obviously barbed wire fence. And here's the reason that she said that she likes these the most. Ultimately, they require less posts. Okay, because if you're putting up woven wire fence, you're going to have several posts in between, and you can save some money on that by using the iron post, right? But you're still going to have lots of posts, but you can use less with the high tensile. She does recommend that when you do use posts, that you use the trio post because they are going to last longer. It has a longer lifespan than normal woven wire, and it requires less maintenance than woven wire fence. So, you know what it's like when you have a tree fall on a woven wire fence, it's got to be restretched. But even over time, woven wire fence is going to have to be restretched anyway. And that was part of her thought process, is that it's a little bit less maintenance in the long run to use the high tensile, because hopefully you're not going to have to restretch that. Now you will, but you can pull a really long string of high tensile fence to tighten that up in comparison to a woven wire fence. Okay, so depending on how your land lays and how the posts are, you may have to pull that woven wire several times in different places, you know, to get it tight again. So the only recommendation she had on the high tensile is make sure that you have really strong brace post, because that wire, you're pulling it pretty tight. Okay, so she recommended the high tensile or the fixed knot high tensile fence. And this fixed knot, if you can see in this picture, the one thing about the fixed knot is that the vertical wires are the wires that are solid all the way through. And so it actually makes the fence stand up on its own, which is kind of nice, all right, because as you're trying to put this stuff up, depending on how you do your woven wire, sometimes it's not as easy to get it up on the post and stretch it as well, but this does, and it kind of holds itself up. So anyway, she recommends going with the high tensile. If you've ever been to the University of Kentucky Sheep Research Farm, that's all they have is high tensile, and they really like it, and I can't imagine they would ever do anything else. So that's my thought on that. Now, when we're talking about managing our forages, okay, and mitigating our parasite infestation, this is where we're talking about temporary fencing. This is where we're talking about your interior fencing options, okay? Now, some of us, just because of the way the farms are when we bought them, or when our parents had it, we might have fields already designated up with woven wire, and that's fine, right? No big deal. You can still use temporary fencing inside of those areas in order to actually maximize your forage use with your small ruminants. But the nice thing about the temporary fencing is that it's easy to set up. Okay, so you don't have to put in multiple different woven wire fields in your farm, which one would be expensive, and two, as soon as you put it up, you're gonna realize that you wish you'd done the fields a different way. Okay, that's why the temporary is nice. So it's easy to set up. You can move it, right? That field's not big enough, you don't like the way it is, or they're not eating enough in a certain area, fence. Allows for a variety of heights on the wire. So this is like a netting, a picture of a netting here. You don't have to use netting, you use a ribbon, multiple ribbons, multiple wires to do the same thing. It can be electrified. This is the other part I really like about it. Okay, so you can electrify that. And because I've had some goats that I swear they could get out of anything. Okay, so but I electrified it and it was a little bit better. But you can kind of keep them under control that way. And again, it allows for multiple different paddock designs. Again, you can keep them near shade for a bit, move them again or water if you want them to move around different areas of a particular field. Uses temporary fencing. Okay, but here's some things to consider. Okay, we're going to use temporary, especially electric fencing. Your animals have got to be trained to that electric fence. Okay, so don't expect to put up these really pretty straight ribbon electric fence and just throw your sheep or your goats into it, because they're just going to run through it because there's gaps in between and they're like totally going through that. Okay, now I did have a buck once that had horns, and it didn't matter what I did, he could figure out how to get those horns between the wires and spread them and then just wiggle himself through things. So I'm not saying it's 100% always going to work, but if you train them to the electric fence, generally you can have a pretty good experience with that. You're gonna want to add a few feet to the measurement. Like when you're making your plans and trying to figure out how much electric fence that you're gonna need to do whatever the fields that you're trying to do, go ahead and add a few extra feet, because I will tell you inevitably, however you do the math, or you use your Google Maps, or you measure it out, you're gonna probably get the number wrong. So add feet. Regardless of the charger size, and I'll tell you some electric charger ads that look really good, right? But regardless of their size, they're not always going to reach their advertised capacity. There's always going to be some reason that they're not going to. There's something that's going to shorten out, or you're going to wind up with longer lengths of wire than what you originally intended, or whatever. Okay, but you're never going to get to that capacity. But shoot for 6,000 volts or higher. Because believe it or not, small remnants, it takes a pretty good zap to get their attention and to keep them from trying it. So go with 6,000 volts or higher. Again, if you have a lot of fence, that goes around, the higher you get that voltage, the more you're going to be able to get out of that particular charger without having to get another one. Okay. All wires have different capacities to carry a charge. So when you are shopping around, check for that. Okay. So if you're going to get a 6,000 volts or higher charger, then make sure that the wire is going to be adequate with that. And the biggest thing is grounding. Grounding is super, super important. Okay. So we're going to talk about that specifically here. So to get your electric fence to work to its optimum potential, which is again what you want to do, because we as small ruminant producers, we don't get a whole lot of money per animal when we sell them, right? So we need to be as efficient as we possibly can with our stuff. So let's make sure that if we're going to use this temporary electric line, that we get it set up well and we do it right, so that way we can really maximize the cost that it cost us to buy the charger and the wire and the post and the clamps and the clips and all that stuff that goes with this. Okay, I'm not saying that's cheap. I'm just saying that it's easy to put out and it's easy to set up, and it's going to give you several different potential in your fields and that kind of stuff, but none of it's cheap. Okay, so to really get this work, you got to have this grounding system going. Now, I'll cover this in a second, but you need at least 3 ground posts, okay, on that charger. All right, they need to be 6 feet in the ground, and they need to be 10 feet apart. Now, our farm is like rock ledges with a little bit of dirt on top, so trying to get these ground rods in at 6 feet sometimes is impossible. So I will tell you, these ground rods don't have to go straight into the ground. They can go in at an angle, but if you angle them, you still need to make sure that your next post is still 10 feet away from that other post. So if you have to end up angling it to the right, then your next post is probably going to have to be angled to keep that 10 feet apart. Okay, because what you're trying to do is maximize the ions that are going on in that moist soil in order to try to make sure that that ground hits, and it's going to zap them. Like, again, this is a horse in this picture, but it's getting his nose. You want to make sure on your small runs that it gets their nose enough that it gets their attention. Okay. And then you're going to need like a grounding system about additional every 1,500 feet. Because again, you're going to want to keep that charge going as far as you possibly can around that field. So make sure that you get those additional grounding rods in there. And so some additional resources. Okay. So on our website at kycgo.org, I just mentioned this grazing school. I was talking about Dr. Gaze, came out with that like over a year ago. We cover a lot of stuff about fencing, about fence planning, all the way up to like getting it set up. Just like this electric fence, we walk all the way through that. We talk about the different fencing options. So that's a thing. If you take the Small Runner Profit School, we talk about fencing and facilities and that as well. UK does fencing schools. I highly recommend watching for those. They're generally like in April, towards the end of March, and they will actually, it's hands-on. They put you on the ground, they give you the equipment, and you set the thing up, so that way you get some experience. And then the Hoofprint magazine, we have lots of archive schools on there. We have articles on temporary fencing, perimeter fencing. We've got hacks that producers have given us over the years that we put in, so you can check that out as well. We also have some videos. If you go to our In the Know section, We have videos about fencing on there too. So, and then if you don't find the answer to the question that you have, you can always contact me and I'll be more than happy to help you. And if I don't know the answer, I will for sure find somebody who does. Best way to get me is generally by email, because sometimes I'm somewhere in the state and I don't get cell phone service. But you can shoot me an email and we can go back and forth with that and meet with people, all the time about stuff. So I guess if you have any questions, now would be that time that you can unmute yourself.
Yeah, I see there's one question. Lynn, let me know if it wasn't answered, but it says with the electric fence, how many wires and what heights off the ground?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so if you're going to use the high tensile fence, you're always going to want to keep in mind that you've got littles. So they're going to have some wires that are kind of low and kind of close together, but you don't want them so low, right, that you're going to have to like weed all the time. Okay, and that's the other reason of getting that 6,000 volt or higher charger, is so that way you can kind of mitigate some of that stuff. But you're going to want to put them closer together towards the bottom. I don't know if there's any like really scientific, it has to be so many inches this way or that way, but you're going to want to make sure you put your wires closer together towards the bottom. And then you get about halfway up, about the height of like an animal's shoulder, then you can start spreading that out. I have people that put the high tensile wire about as high as like what a normal woven wire fence would be. Because they have the, like, you're thinking about at some point a deer's going to jump that fence, right? So they have a higher one to try to discourage that as much as they possibly can. But that's generally the one that you're going to wind up having to retighten and splice. And high tensile wire is super easy to splice and fix. And you got those ratchets along the way. It's way easier than fixing a woven wire fence when something like that happens. And we only have woven wire, so I know what you're going to go through. But I would do at least 7 wires if you're going to do a high tensile fence, with the majority of those being closer together towards the bottom.
Okay. There is a question. Let's see. Lorena, where do I look for information on UK Fencing School? I have posted that link in the chat. You can also Google 2024 University of Kentucky Fencing Schools and see them, but it looks like there's 2. Currently I can share my screen real quick, I think here.
Yeah, they generally do too. Now they're in Western Kentucky most of the time.
Yeah, there's one in on April 23rd in Moorhead, and there's one April 25th in Mayfield, it looks like. So you can
I was talking to Kenny Andrews about like in Moorhead. I'm like, are you gonna do it in Moorhead this year? So good. I'm glad.
Yes.
I'm glad that
Yeah,
you're
so
able
we
to
got
do that.
yes.
Yep.
There's another question here. What about, let's see, what about temporary fence heights inside the perimeter fence?
Okay, so on your inside, if you use the netting, obviously it is what it is. Okay, the netting is going to come to a certain height. This is where the training of the animals come into play. Okay, if your animals are trained to that electric, I see lots of people using 1 strand all the way around that field. Okay, because they know they don't need to push it. If they've got lambs or kids, they probably have like 2. I would say a minimum, if your animals are just kind of brand new to this and you haven't had very long to train into that, I would do at least 3 or 4 wires. And then you can just kind of test them after that. So after they get used to it, you can take some down. And then that way you've got that as a spare to fix if anything gets tore up. But you can get away with 1.
All right. I don't see any other questions in chat. Does anyone have any more questions? You're welcome to come off of mute and ask them.
Or if you've got suggestions, like if you use your electric fence and you found ways to do your ground rods, that's 6 feet in the ground. I guess one thing I should say, if you have to cross a creek with electric wire in order to make your fields, I have seen lots of people take a wire across and drape it as tight as they can, and then just string electric wires from that, and then tie like bolts, like the nuts and the bolts onto them, like to keep the wires kind of taut, but it would still flow in the water if it had to. That seems to work pretty good. Again, you're going to want to make sure that's pretty stinking hot. Okay, so if they come across that, I mean, most of us don't have sheep and goats that are like going to wade through a creek to get somewhere. That's just not kind of their MO. But if you do, you can use those electric wires just kind of hanging down there with those bolts on them. That seems to work okay.
All right. There's a question about the height of a perimeter fence.
Okay, so again, if you use a high tensile, I would go with at least 7 strands, and I would make sure that it's going to be at least, probably 5 feet high. Again, you're always going to have issues with like deer and that kind of stuff jumping in. It's just kind of the way that it is. But they're not like on the predator list, with your animals. So you're going to want to have them closer to the ground. Again, for predator things, and then to keep your lamb and kids inside. And then, but I would go at least 5 feet high. Well, that's about what a typical woven wire height is. And then people will put a barbed wire across the top. I have seen people put barbed wire across the top of their high tensile, too. It's just not electrified. So, and you don't have to electrify all 7 strands in the high tensile either. Okay. So electrify a couple on the bottom, 1 in the middle, and you may not even electrify the top at all. So that saves you some money in the long run, by doing that too. So.
Okay. There was a question about, or I guess a comment, not a question, saying that they'll never get ground 6 feet down. I did put in the chat a publication on proper grounding, so there's a link to it. So everyone's welcome to check it out.
And again, remember, that's pipe dream. Okay, we do the best that we can. If you don't get 3 rods 6 feet in, you're just going to reduce, the amount of that charge and that voltage that's going to go around. But the thing that I see the most that people don't do is that every 1,500 feet, they put another ground rod in. If you do that, that's really going to help. Like even if you couldn't get all 3 of those 6 feet in the ground, if you've got more every 1,500 feet, that's really going to help you out as far as like keeping that charge going as far as possible.
Okay.
But I get it. I can't
yeah.
do 6 feet all the time either. I get it.
Especially Eastern Kentucky, right? I used the dual conductor fence from Premier One. No ground is needed since it is built into the fence. No questions from me, but thank you for your presentation. I look forward to the others.
Yes, and that I have several producers that are trying that out and they really like it because they also really like the way that they can like step the posts and stuff in. So sorry, I got a kid behind me like making a bunch of racket. You can just like
you're fine. I have a dog that's wanting to bark right now.
I was like story of my life.
Belita asks, what voltage repels coyotes?
Well, that's a really good question. I don't know that any of them repel coyotes. Most of us are going to have guard dogs. And so I also get a lot of questions from people. Well, my guard dog is in this electrified temporary fence area. What do I do? Like if they need to get outside of that? There's these things that you can build that are called jump gates. And I'm actually going to be covering some of that stuff this year through the development office. But they're like these wooden jump gates that have like these hinged plywood triangle gates like on them, and literally you can put that inside your fence and the dog will jump through that jump gate, and your sheep and your goats, it's too high for them but the dogs can get over. That way they can get out of that particular field. You can also use it like they can squeeze through gates, just regular normal pipe gates, and people will put gates in and the dogs can come in and out. Because I know that like people say like, well, I want my dog in the field where my sheep are if I've got this temporary fence up. And that makes total sense. My argument's always been, if I would rather for my dogs to be able to keep those coyotes further away than the field or that lot or paddock or whatever that my animals are in, so that way they can deter that coyote further away than getting right up on the fence where the animals are. So I don't know that you could really ever shock a coyote enough. You're just going to want to be able to keep your guard dogs where they can, intimidate and try to get them away.
All right. During the summer, when they are grazing on grass, how much supplemental feed do they require? What is a good supplemental feed for goats?
Okay, so depending on what your forage is like, you may not have to use supplemental grading at all. Okay, if they're on pasture. One of the key ways that you can tell is to do body condition scoring. And that's one of the things that we teach when we do parasitology clinics and stuff. You need to be able to get your hands on your animals and you need to be able to tell, can you feel that backbone? Can you feel ribs? Can you feel like that chest bone and that kind of stuff? If you can feel a moderate layer of coverage on those things. Like if you put your hand on an animal's back and you can just feel that backbone sticking up like this, you got some problems. Okay, those girls need some groceries. All right. But if they look pretty good to you, right? They look like they got a good finish on them. You may not have to supplement. It's kind of hard. Like you can get your pastures tested for their nutrient requirements, but there's not a whole lot of labs that do that, and it can be a little expensive. But what I tell people is for sure, get your hay tested, okay? Because you're going to start all your rations out with your hay, and then you're only going to supplement with grain to make up the difference on what that hay can't do, okay? So again, in the summer, you may not have to supplement your grain. If you're trying to get like replacement females ready for breeding in the fall, you may have to supplement grain. You're just going to have to watch what their growth rate is, but you need to keep in mind the summer is hot. So most animals don't really gain super well in the summer. Okay, they'll eat it, but it doesn't really mean that they're going to gain a whole lot. So you're just going to have to make sure you try to keep them cool and ventilated as much as you can if that's what you're trying to do. But we have a whole nutrition course on that too. So really, I could probably do a whole nother, and Dr. Ely's going to talk about nutrition next week, right? So he'll cover some of this stuff too, but you know, I could go on for a long time about that particular question. So, but if you've got good forage, and don't graze your pastures down any more than like 4 to 6 inches. Okay. So if you have a pasture that they can graze over so many days, don't go below 6 inches, move them to another field. You're probably doing okay, right? You're probably doing okay.
All right. How many goats, sheep per acre in a fenced pasture?
Okay, if it's straight up pasture and it's nice grass, okay, again, like I said, you could graze it, you can get it down to 6 inches and rotate them to another field. If you're grazing it and you're getting it down to 2 inches, you're not going to have much recovery time. That grass isn't going to grow super well. They're actually probably going to like graze your forages out of there over a period of time if you keep doing that. But we normally say if it's a good clean pasture, you can have 4 animals per acre. And that's because once they have babies, you're exponentially increasing the amount that grass has to cover for animals. So usually shoot for 4 per acre.
All right. And then the last question I'm seeing here is, are donkeys good predator defenses?
Donkeys can be good. You're going to want to get, if you get a donkey, you're going to want to get a donkey that's been with small ruminants in the past. Because one of the things that I get calls about a lot is that donkeys do not like change. Now, your guard dog animals don't really like change either. And that's just part of their behavior, right? Like they need to be able to recognize that there's something different in that field and go investigate it. That's what you want them to do. But donkeys just really don't like change in general. So I have had producers that have lost babies because the sheep or the goats will start lambing and kidding and the donkeys will go kill them because that's different than what's been in their field before. So I always recommend if you're going to do that, get it from somebody who has animals that have been with those sheep and goats before. And again, check their attitude, right? Some of them are pretty aggressive and they'll be really good at it. Some of them are not. The other thing you need to think about, the difference between like a donkey and a dog, is a dog will stay out at night. What is that donkey gonna do? She's gonna go in the barn with everybody else, because she's gonna go to sleep. Okay, so those coyotes, they may not deter those coyotes in that like dusky evening or like early morning when they're super active, but they can work okay.
All right, that is all the questions I'm seeing right now. If anyone has any last minute questions, you're welcome to come off mute or put in the chat box. Just to reiterate what Kelly was saying about hay, sampling your hay and sending it in for testing nutrients. Check with your local county extension office. I know like in Fleming County, I do have a hay probe that I do loan out to folks. We do encourage you to take a proper sample, which is at least 10 to 15 bales. So you would take a core sample out of each of those bales, and then submit that to whatever lab that you want to. And it could be Kentucky Department of Ag. They have a laboratory for testing hay. I know I use Dairy One a lot as well. So there's different options, and they can test for whatever different things you want tested. But ideally, most of the time, you're just getting the plain NIR, I believe the normal nutrient analysis that provides the best information for you. But if you think you have molds or toxins or anything like that, they also can go into more depth on that kind of stuff, but we don't get very much of that. So mostly it's just for nutrients. So we definitely offer that in Fleming County as an option for you to borrow a hay probe if you need to. And I can talk about how to use and all that kind of stuff as well. So all
We
right.
also have a nutrition course, and in that course we have a spreadsheet that you can go in and put your hay results in, and then you can mark like what feedstuffs that you have at your local feed mill or that's like in your feed, and then we can figure out how much feed you need to be feeding for different stages. And it even does a printout, like I said, if you have the ability to do bulk feed, do it. Okay, so if you can use this spreadsheet, it'll actually print out a sheet for you that you can take to the feed mill and say, I need this much of each of these components, and they can make your feed ration for you.
All right. And then we have one last question here. What grasses are best?
Well, you're going to have fescue in your pasture, right? That's going to be your basis. You're going to have that in there. The key to your grazing is to make sure that you've got a mixture between warm and cool season grasses. That way you're able to graze pretty much all year long, okay? Because if you have a whole lot of cool season grasses, as soon as it gets warm, you're done, okay? And you don't have as much rotational grazing options at that point. So work with your county extension agent, okay, because they can come, they can help you identify what those forages are. UK has a really great forage ID publication that you can download on your phone, and you can walk out in your field and you can figure out what you have. And then if you don't have enough warm or you don't have enough cool seasons, you can talk to your agent about getting those seeded in there. But you're going to want to have a nice mixture. Again, fescue is always going to be your base. And fescue's not bad, right? You're going to have some endophyte-free fescues out there. But we're learning that if you don't have that and you have red clover in your fields, you're going to be able to mitigate some of the issues that you have with that. So we have some of that research on our website too. But you're going to want to have a good mix is really what I can tell you in those pastures. And again, you're going to want to be able to manage those forages in a way that you don't graze them down too low. So that way they can replenish themselves. In a pipe dream world, folks, a pipe dream world, we would have enough fields that when you rotate your animals, they don't come back to that field for like 6 weeks. You give it a 6-week rest and put them back in there. Now, I don't have that. Most people don't have that, but we just try to manage as good as we can. Since I don't have that option, I have what I call a sacrifice area. So I have a field that I can put them in. I can give them stored forages like hay rolls and that kind of stuff to get through a drought period, which, you know, who didn't have that last year, right? To get through a drought period, you can put them in that sacrifice area, give them some supplemental growth if you have to. Again, you'll know if you test your forages whether you have to do that or not. Give them some stored forages until that grass comes back on, and then you can kick them back out.
All right. I think that's all the questions we have. Thank you so much, Kelly. We greatly appreciate you spending.
Thanks for having me. I like talking about sheep and goat stuff. So
perfect. Yes, yes. I'll be honest. I was not raised with sheep and goats, so I don't know a whole lot about it. But over the years with Extension, I am learning a lot. So
yes. So it's all good. It's all good. We're happy to help you out.
Yeah, well, I appreciate it. And so thank you again so very much. We love having you on and your expertise. If anyone has further questions, feel free to reach out to us. We're happy if you reach out to Kelly or to myself, and then I'll get with Kelly. Either way works.
Yep.
Next week will be our second session. We'll have Dr. Ely on from University of Kentucky. He'll be covering sheep breeding and lambing, and then we'll have Dr. Jessie Lay on from Kentucky State University, and she'll be covering kidding and goat breeding. So it might be a little bit longer next week, so just be a little bit prepared for that. Have you a snack ready because we have to cover quite a bit next week. But if you all need anything in the meantime, let us know. I'll send reminder emails, and I will also send the link to the recording from tonight if you want to go back and watch it. So thank you again, Kelly. Everyone have a good evening, and we appreciate y'all. Good night.
Thanks. Good night.
Bye.